welcome to the last episode of Techtonic Talks. Today we are joined with Ioan Marc Jones. Thank you for joining us. Ioan is a writer and editor whose works featured in The Guardian, The Times, The FT, The Independent, The Spectator, The iPaper, among many other outlets. He currently works with Pull the Plug to mitigate the risks associated with artificial intelligence, AI.
Our podcast today is based on a story written by our reporter, Ben Pulowski, about the UK's growing grassroots initiatives against AI and big tech. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Right, so let's dive right in. So Ioan, why did you join Pull the Plug?
So I think it comes down to the writer-editor thing to start. So when ChatGPT came out, I remember being quite like most people, blown away by its power and its potential and all these things and thinking, how did this work? And then when I started to uncover it, a lot of it was kind of like, I kind of had seen this story play out before. I remember reading a lot about in Surveillance Capitalism, the book by Shoshana Zuboff. It's a great book that kind of tallies all these things that big tech do. And it's this permissionless innovation, they call it, or, move fast and break things. And a lot of it is they just go ahead and do things, often kind of not in the spirit of the law. And then once it's there, it's kind of irrevocable. So as a writer, I started looking into what happened to create that tech. And I knew it would be largely based on extraction, so taking loads of data from across the world and across the internet largely. And I was just a bit confused by it, but also a bit scared by it, I think. And as it developed, everything I started seeing more and more, it scared me more. So the misinformation thing, I don't know, when Google Overviews came out, I just started asking it pretty common questions. I was doing this research project, it's very weird, but it was when KFC was built in Brixton. So there's KFC on the corner of Brixton, people might know it. And I just Googled, when was this KFC built, right? And it told me 1953. I can't remember the exact dates, but I'll say it as an embellished story. And it said 1953. And then I was like, wow, that's amazing. That KFC's been there for 70 years. And so then I Googled when KFC was created and found an actual SEO sort of search engine result, and Google wasn't created till 10 years after. So that Brixton KFC was built 10 years before KFC was created, or Colonel Sanders was a thing. And I just went, that's absurd. But
can you explain to our listeners kind of what Pull the Plug is?
Yeah, so it's a grassroots movement created by normal people. And it's basically, it wants to have more democratic accountability with big tech, basically. And that might mean several asks within particular protests. So for example, right now, some of my colleagues and friends are in Palantir. There's a big NHS conference today in Manchester, and Palantir, I don't know if everyone knows this, but it's a very controversial relationship. Palantir, Sadiq Khan obviously recently blocked a deal with Palantir, but Palantir are in the financial realms of government. They're in the armed forces in some areas, the Ministry of Defence, but they are in the NHS currently, but there is a break clause. So one thing Pull the Plug do is they sort of find these things that are AI related, AI adjacent, and then they sort of get involved and help those protests.
Sure. And the way that you're interrogating the sort of reach of artificial intelligence, do you think in a way that you're criminalising AI?
Criminalising? No, I think it's just about regulation. So it isn't, I'm not even here to sort of say what it should look like. Everything we use is essentially regulated. Our computers are regulated, sandwiches are regulated. But AI is this really, promising tech in some ways. I certainly think that it's going to do amazing things in some fields. But the negative impacts of AI should be regulated the way negative impacts of a car are regulated, and so on and so forth, to some degrees. And there'll always be debates about the form of regulation, how that might look. And that's kind of the conversation I want to have.
Right, so Pull the Plug is not inherently anti-AI, it's just regulated.
Yeah, I should really make that clear. So we're part of our statement is we're not anti-AI, we're not anti-big tech, we're not luddites, none of that. I mean, I worked for a tech charity before this that was promoting the use of tech. I promote the use of tech. There's no reason not to. I mean, it does so much good in the world. But when you have harms around social media for me, feels like a good blueprint for AI, because we had so much promise in the early days. I remember reading about the Arab Spring and pro-democratic protesters. And it was this great promise of connection and social media, really bringing the world together and all these things. And then it sort of became something darker and different. And part of that was because we weren't regulating it, we weren't overseeing it, we weren't thinking about the harms that it was causing. And I I was on social media 10 years ago. I really liked it and I felt that I connected with people. I don't use it anymore because I'm so conscious of the way it's become, what it's become.
Of course. I mean, perhaps there's not one unique vision for where AI and tech will sit in a governmental level, but just going back to your journalism, how does the relationship with tech and AI map onto your work?
I mean, the writing side of things frustrates me a lot because I mean, one thing is that some of my journalism, some of my fiction writing and non-fiction writing, like large essays about my mum's relationship to London and how she was born in, Battersea Council Estates and where she is now and all these things, our entire family history, and it just got swallowed by an AI without any consent from me, obviously no compensation. And a lot of my work has been, and that's okay. And it frustrates me on a small level. But I think with journalism, it's the thing, and fiction particularly, I think a lot of people are annoyed with in terms of fiction because, well, their work is now being undermined by the AI systems, but it's trained on their work. So there's loads of lawsuits at the minute. One example is Amazon now. If an author has a publication, Amazon will, well, they're trying to police it, of course, but unsuccessfully. There'll be loads of self-published AI versions of that, and people are then buying that in the pretense that it's actually the author. Now, of course, that does reputational damage to the author because if you read a really terrible AI book that you think is Jodi Picoult and it's terrible, you're never going to buy a Jodi Picoult again. So there's a lot of ramifications. So, but for me, generally, I'm trying to navigate it in a way that I think is quite difficult and still to try and have that optimism about AI because I do think it's an optimistic tech that can do great things, but still to think about like how the harms that it's having on everyday people.
Would the name pull the plug be a bit misleading in that case?
Yeah, I mean that has been one criticism, and I think it's a fair one. But I think it's like pull the plug on big tech is kind of where we're at, rather than pull the plug on the lack of accountability there and the democratic. I think it was a nifty name as well because you can have like the protest today, like pull the plug on Palantir, and it's just a way of doing things. But it might be, yeah, I think it's a fair criticism.
Would you say that pull the plug is sort of the middleman between the government and these big tech companies?
I think we're basically asking for a better relationship there, where I think what happens with big tech increasingly, and the Zuboff book, Surveillance Capitalism, was such a good exercise in this. It really demonstrated the problem, is that they are kind of not lawless, because that's hyperbolic, but they are quite, in many ways it's that permissionless innovation, right? They go forward and do things, they move forward and break things. And it's almost like the existing regulatory framework doesn't actually account for what they're doing. So Google Books basically went into libraries, scanned all these books, millions, billions of books, many of which were copyrighted, and then used that to gain a profit in some various forms, right? And then obviously the publishers then sued them and said, and in the end Google won, but they did it without asking any permission, even though it was kind of against the spirit of copyright law. But there wasn't a specific regulation for that. And Google's owners, Larry Page, said basically tech is moving faster than outdated modes of law. He called law outdated because they're moving faster and the law can't keep up with them. So I think one thing Pull the Plug tried to do is kind of say, all right, we need to be faster and the government need to be reactive and they need to work with these companies to mitigate. I mean, the irony is a lot of these companies want regulation. I mean, Sam Altman, he regularly talks about the fact you need to regulate AI. Elon Musk says the same thing. They agree you need to regulate it.
Ioan, if you were to have a career shift and go from journalism into politics, what would be one of the first things you would do in sort of department of overseeing AI? What would be your policies? What would you push for?
Okay. I'm not speaking for Pull the Plug here, because one thing that Pull the Plug do want to do is basically have that democratic accountability where everyone speaks, for themselves. I think for me, I would probably think firstly about transparency. So one thing about these models is we don't really know their emissions. And when we have seen emissions, they've often been a bit misleading. We don't really know how they're built, and we don't know what data they're built on. There's no transparency around that. So my first thing would be a kind of data transparency act.
Sorry, with open source intelligence, though, surely all of that information is available online. Anyone can access it.
We can't access where OpenAI, how much emissions they've used to build their models. And there's no information on that. I mean, MIT Review recently had a kind of overview of like the emissions they imagine come from building these models and inference, using the models. And a lot of it was guesswork because we just don't have that open conversation.
Right.
The algorithms, the black box problem, I think people call it, but the algorithms are built without any knowledge. I don't even think Meta or OpenAI know what's going on with their algorithms, but we do know they can tinker with them. So for example, Elon Musk, I remember on X, and this is when one of the sort of most damaging moments when I was looking at AI and thinking about its potential in positive and negative ways was when someone asked Grok a question on X, and it was like, who's more violent, the far left or the far right? And the Grok responded and said, the far right is more violent than the far left. And Elon Musk got involved and said, well, we'll have to change that because that's factually wrong. So he's taken an AI and said, I'm going to change it. And so I'm going to manipulate it to reflect the truth that I believe. And I think that's where we need that transparency, because everyone needs to understand what exactly is going into these models and why the outputs are the way they are.
Is that an extreme example, though? This is an example of bias. And we don't see all, AI models being governed by one particular individual who wants to push an agenda, push a narrative.
But I think either way, you need transparency around what's happening. I mean, it's kind of the same with SEO, the Google's algorithm. There was so much going into it and so much that we didn't see. And it's just about having someone basically in government having an independent view of what that looks like. So that's what I would say. I think my first thing would just be broad transparency.
So obviously these tech companies want to make their profit, right? And with government regulation, they're probably going to try to fight that. And so how do you see kind of a path forward for governmental organizations to actually put through regulation that makes everyone happy?
I don't think regulation does make everyone happy, but I think ultimately one good example is the EU AI Act. That's pretty much the large, consistent, applicable regulation, and so far it's been pretty much ignored. Like it's got things that companies have to do, like GDPR is kind of reflective of that. But in terms of punishments and fines, we're seeing very little. I mean, I was Googling this last night, actually. I don't think there's been a single fine. And some of the things it says is like, in broad terms, you're not allowed to spread misinformation. And I was just kind of going, how have they not found a single AI model that has not spread misinformation in some form? I mean, I can do it by the end of this meeting. Before I get to a bus stop, I can find some misinformation for you, but it's not punishing it in a way. It's open to interpretation, and big tech will just run riot, because if you can't hold them to account in very specific ways, then it's not gonna have any impact. I think that the irony is, I don't even think that, again, big tech need to be even involved in these conversations the way obviously the people need to define what happens with those citizens' assemblies. But I think big tech should have a voice. What would they like to see? It's interesting when they're calling for regulation. I would like to know what they want regulated, what they would, reflect their needs too. But it has to be ultimately driven by a democratic voice.
Yeah, and who holds more power, the government or the tech giants?
Oh, I don't think there's a simple question. I mean, I think there's a lot of undemocratic power in tech. I mean, for example, they do largely control information ecosystems. A good example is with Elon Musk tinkering with but they're all defining what outputs are coming out. That's how AI is built. The algorithms do that. But if you look at Google and the search engines, Tim Wu, who's a Harvard researcher, he found that they had been corrupting search to further their strategic objectives. So Google have been doing this for years. This precedes what we know as generative AI or Google overviews. And a lot of big tech do that. If someone holds the keys to the sort of information you're receiving, that's concerning. And they have a lot of undemocratic, unaccountable power there. Again, all the meta social platforms, they can tinker with the algorithms and show you what you need to see. X, again, serves as a really brash example, because I mean, I was on Twitter before and it was very liberal, largely the things I was fed. If I go on Twitter now, and I don't often, or X now.
What do you use?
Absurdly, I use LinkedIn, and it is ridiculous because I basically go on there sort of once a week, and because I kind of miss social media. I went off Instagram around Cambridge Analytica, and then they were paid for Brexit campaigns, Donald Trump campaigns, and so on and so forth, used these systems to nudge people in certain directions politically. So I was kind of like, okay, that's messed up. According to my politics, I was just not really willing to accept those systems. And I kind of started pulling away.
From a point of view of accountability, or because of what they were doing with the data?
But both, I suppose, because there wasn't accountability for what they were doing with the data. So for example, that system, obviously when it came out, there was loads of uproar. But it was kind of like Leveson. I don't know if you remember this, because it's kind of related, but Leveson, obviously the media regulation, everyone was quite shocked by what happened with the phone hacking and everything like that. And the result of the inquiry was minimal, and nothing actually tangible change. Ofcom got, if I remember right, it was like they got a bit more power or something like that. And similarly with Cambridge Analytica, we
What
didn't.
news of the world got shut down?
But that was consequent because of reputational damage, right? With the Cambridge Analytica, when that came out, not much really happened. So I started leaning off the social platforms, but I wanted them. So I still have X because I had quite a following, and I wasn't willing to get rid of it very selfishly. But I just don't go on it anymore, and I probably will delete it now because it's getting worse. Yeah, without serious regulation around that, I don't know. I don't really want to get too involved. And LinkedIn just is for professional purposes. I kind of need it, which is the cult of convenience. There's so much that I still use Google. I still have Gmail. We email on Gmail. And yeah, and even though I find Google quite a dangerous company in very various ways, I still have to use these things because that's kind of, it's the cult of convenience. It's how I log into everything. And I could, in theory, really draw back, but it's quite difficult, and my previous 3 workplaces have in some way depended on Google models.
So with Pull the Plug, what have been kind of the wins so far? What have you seen that the government has been listening to the people?
I think the big win was we had a big march, which was the biggest sort of, they called it an anti-AI march, but again, we're not anti-AI. It's just calling for more accountability. But anti-AI, I think, was an easy way for journalists to frame that march, I think. So that was the big one, was the biggest in Europe, I believe, and it was covered by all the main press. In terms of government listening, there's been really nothing there. I think we need to grow in order for that to happen, and that's part of it. We're really new and we're small, and we're trying to push forward and try and get to the public's attention. I think we're having some influence on Palantir, the Palantir protest that we're doing today, and we're hoping to, who we're really reaching out to is patients, but also sort of leaders within the NHS and saying back the break clause and hoping to push that. What I've encountered in Pull the Plug is some people think AI is a complete scam and it's a joke, and other people are afraid that it's going to destroy the world tomorrow. And it's this complete spectrum of people. Others just really want to use the tech, and we use the tech, we use AI, and it's nothing anti-AI in the sense of like never use it in our lives. But it's just about kind of finding those middle grounds where people care and trying to find those intersections and letting people speak for themselves.
Thank you so much, Ioan, for joining us.
Thank you.
If you'd like to read more about Ben's story on grassroots movements tackling AI, you can go to www.thetechtonicmagazine.com.